My guest today is Jon Kol. Jon is the co-founder at Hyperlane. Of course, Hyperlane is the open interoperability framework. We'll learn all about this today. Welcome to the show, Jon.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, Jon. Let's do what we do at the beginning of the show. It would be cool if you could briefly introduce yourself. Would love to hear a little bit of your, backstory, I guess. What have you been doing in the lead up to co-founding Hyperlane?
Oh, of course, happy to. So, I got my break into crypto, give or take about 8 years ago, but started off on the investor side. You know, not an engineer by trade. That seemed like the easiest way to get involved in the industry and start having an impact. So, um, just before co-founding Hyperlane, I was running the investment team at Galaxy Digital. Mike Novogratz's firm. A bunch of people are familiar with it, and spent a bunch of time thinking about like, wait a minute, these internet computers, these blockchains are like some of the coolest things in the world, and there's obviously going to be so many of them. There's going to be just dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands. And wait, you're telling me that they can't really talk to each other kind of by default? And so even as an investor, this idea of like, how are these chains all going to work together, right? Like, how do we get the sort of internet of blockchains that feels as seamless as the internet that we're used to? And so spent a ton of time on this idea of interoperability between chains, and having felt like it wasn't sufficiently moving in the right direction by the end of 21, I was like, all right, well, if it's not happening, someone's got to do it. Someone's got to try it. Maybe that's going to be me.
Very nice. That makes perfect sense, Jon. So in terms of Hyperlane then, so at the top of the show, we said it's all about interoperability. And of course, interoperability is key for this multi-chain future that we are all working towards. So let's talk about Hyperlane. So you guys are, Hyperlane is designed to scale in an app chain world with this, I guess potentially thousands and thousands of rollups, chains. It's the multi-chain future. But of course, to make that multi-chain future, everything needs to talk to each other, Jon. So with that in mind, maybe just from your perspective, tell us the importance of that interoperability. It's a fun word to say, isn't it? And
It probably was about a year into doing this that I got to a standpoint where every time I would say it, it would just roll off the tongue, because that word's not a tongue roller. That is a tongue twister, as they say. So it takes a lot of practice.
So paint the picture of, from your perspective, why interoperability is so crucial for that multi-chain narrative.
Totally, right? I'll put it in like really basic terms. I think crypto people are really good at kind of seeing one step ahead, but oftentimes not seeing 2 and 3 steps ahead. And so over the last couple of years, you've seen people really understand, like, wait a second, the market thinks chains are valuable. Valuable, useful things are happening on chains. We should make a chain for our, and in some cases, we should make a generalizable chain and try to convince a lot of people to do interesting, useful things on it. In some other cases, it's a team that's already doing something useful on a chain somewhere, call it like, say, the Uniswap team, thinking we should have Unichain. But one way or the other, many people in the industry kind of drew the conclusion of we should make one more chain, and where they tend to just stop right there. Like, wait, so I should have a chain because it's useful and valuable, but they don't stop to think, well, how is my chain going to communicate those valuable, useful things with the myriad others that are just created? And there's almost this sort of like, someone's going to figure it out. Someone's just going to take care of it. But there is no someone. There is no magic. People have to actually go ahead and do this. And so why is it really so important? Well, at a fundamental level, like, everyone is kind of familiar with, oh, well, a blockchain kind of makes digital resources scarce. And so we're going to have a block, and it's going to have a certain size, and a certain amount of transactions can fill up that block. And what do we do when more transactions want to fill that block than there is space for? Well, if this was a bus, we just change the ticket price to get on the bus. We don't suddenly say there's going to be 1,000 more seats on demand. We don't have an easy ability to do that. We just do surge pricing. Well, that, while really useful in the context of one chain, kind of has this like self-defeating property where you, me, everyone else who's been working in the industry, we're putting all of our life force towards increasing the demand for these blockchains. But so long as they kind of definitionally constrain the space, that demand ends up being counterproductive, because now we've convinced all these people you should use blockchains, they're really great, and then all of them at once decide to use them, and suddenly like, wait a minute, I need to pay how much to just do this thing that I wanted to do? That's not what you told me a minute ago. What you told me a minute ago is that this is a much more effective and efficient and faster way than anything else that's existed. And so we need to horizontally scale the number of these, right? Like the internet is not one big server, in some underground fort somewhere. It's a massive network of billions of different servers that is all seamlessly connected. And us as the users, we're none the wiser, right? Like most people don't stop to think like, is this thing, I just visited this app and was it hosted on like AWS Zone East 7? Or am I actually like hosted on servers that the company itself owns and operates somewhere? And that's not the case with blockchains right now. And so if we want to actually, all this work that we're doing to increase the demand for them, to not be counterproductive, to not end up in a state where, hey, we actually convinced half of the developed world to start using this. Hey, we just convinced 20% of the developing world to start using this technology. And for it to still be usable at the end of those demand increases, we need that form of horizontal scaling. And what is only now, this point we're at in kind of like the middle of 2025, really starting to feel like it's solved, is the connective tissue. It's the interoperability. It's like, how do I make sure that the asset that I have here can move to all these other places? How can I make sure that me as a user, I can interact with apps almost irrespective of where they are? And that's where something like Hyperlane comes in.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, we did see some solutions starting off like at the time where we co-founded Hyperlane. But what wasn't the case was like, it was mostly teams that built a solution that they would have to then operate and extend to everybody else. And so you wanted to get this connectivity, you need to talk to that team. That team will do a terrific job, will give you all the services. But we were thinking, well, how is that going to work if there's like 1,000 of these, 10,000 of these, and you just keep adding zeros? There's no way that's going to work.
Yeah,
And
so
so you need
that's one of the
something.
core differences, John, and that's I guess from your perspective at Hyperlane, you guys have approached it as one of the core principles of decentralization. I guess is you've made it like open and permissionless by design. So which makes much more sense if we're building towards this future where every chain can talk to each other, right?
We totally think so, right? We're obviously very biased, but we
Yes.
totally think so. We started from like, what's funny is we went through a different, call it like, process or maturation than some of the other players in the interoperability space went to. Our starting point was, we need to build something that any other developer, like you can try to lower the bar as low as you can, but any other developer could take this and add it to their chain, add it to somebody else's chain, connect their app, do all those things, and really kind of figure out how to do this themselves with this toolkit, this framework that we're giving them. And only then, after doing that, realizing, oh, actually, well, there's a large portion of the addressable market that would really just wants this to be dispensed to them as a service. Crypto is not large enough yet that there's a mass market of people who will kind of scalably deploy, run, and operate this themselves. Whereas for most other teams, we need to build something that lets us extend this capability to everybody else. And that kind of created like a different, operating philosophy, different set of like core principles. And so today, like, you can either run, deploy, operate Hyperlane yourself, or if you want to, right, our like labs entity, our development company, is happy to extend those as like a pretty low cost service, just give you everything you need. But unlike anywhere else, you actually have that option. And there's about, a dozen teams that have taken on that option and really like it, really love the level of control that they get from exercising that option.
And some of the tooling that you guys provide, it's customizable, right? So it's not just about bridging or cross-chain swaps. There's, some more esoteric use cases, of course, are available, and it's customizable. So, you would have different security models depending on the use case
Totally.
and, the value of the transaction, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and exactly because of that type of customizability, what we see is, I won't say large, but it's a good size and growing. I won't tell you that this is like 90% of people who use Hyperlane. It's about 20% and climbing. That they're just baking this instead of just using it like as something that is, call it, at the edge for them. There's their chain, then there's like a Hyperlane integration, and they interact with that integration. There's a growing number of teams that what they're doing is they're baking Hyperlane much deeper into their product stack. And so they're taking this framework and they're saying, okay, so it's very obvious to me what I could do if I just treated it as like some integration that, like, I have, something akin to like an on-chain API and I interact with that API, and that's all well and good. What if I brought that API into my stack? What other things could I do? What could that let me do? And we're seeing that continue to grow. People doing really cool things with it. I'll give you one example. Two teams that we love working with that are in, call it the rollup as a service, or as I like to call them, rollup provider space. They have realized, hey, their clients actually really like working with Hyperlane. It's great that any one of these customer chains can launch and have interoperability from day one. But what else could we do if we just made it a default option that's just on their chains from the moment that chain is spun up? Like, now we could do there's a whole lot of other things that we can do. And one of them, I won't name the name, but anyone who like follows Hyperlane will know this. They're creating a whole like internal network between all of their customers. So now there's a reason to use them as opposed to any other provider, because what they give you is not just connectivity with the whole world. They also give you unique connectivity with any one of the other customer chains. And you get a little bit like, sometimes maybe it's cheaper execution, maybe it's better security. But they're able to do that because everything with Hyperlane was open source. And they're like, our choices are either we go ahead and we try and build a system like this, starting at zero, or, well, we've already used Hyperlane a bunch of times with our customers. Each time is like its own specific integration. We're already pretty familiar with it. Why don't we just bring this straight into the stack? And now that they've done that, they're about to launch with this new feature where, again, every new customer chain has Hyperlane on it. They have like a security zone that they operate between all of their clients. And those clients will be able to leverage Hyperlane in a much easier way than ever before. And the best part is a bunch of them are never even going to like talk to us unless they want to, right? If they come to us and they're like, hey, Jon, I'd love to talk to you about something, of course, we'll find a time. But a lot of people don't like that. They'd much rather never have to deal with any of that. And that reality is going to be the case in just about a month or two when this goes live.
Yeah, very, very well said, Jon. And of course, there's a token, and the token, great name, Hyper, of course. A TGE for Hyper, I believe that was I guess that was last month. That was in April, wasn't it? And there was a retroactive
late April.
airdrop. But yeah, just talk to us about the Hyper token, what it's for, and also, I understand that there's expansion rewards. Explain how that can work. So if people aren't involved now, they still can get involved, right?
Exactly right. And there's a long time for them to be involved. So we don't want to rush anybody. But as as we talked about a lot through this conversation, everything in Hyperlane is open source. Everything is permissionless. And so you could easily end up in a case where Hyperlane kind of spreads in many, many directions, but there's not a lot in common between all the different systems that leverage Hyperlane, different zones that leverage Hyperlane. You kind of want to mitigate that, but at the same time, let people still have that flexibility if they want to. So on the whole, I think of Hyper as sort of a, unifying thing between a subset of all the chains, apps, and users that use Hyperlane. And it's meant to basically keep them aligned, keep them, in some like state, basically create an alliance between them. I like, in my head, I like calling it the Rebel Alliance, because with Hyperlane, we always we are underdogs ourselves, and we like to, take care of the underdog. And I always have this sort of like underdog mentality, which is useful many, many times. Now, what does it actually do? So the first thing it does is, when people think of cross-chain, to the extent that they're familiar with it, one of the first things that comes to mind to them is like, well, is it safe? Is it secure? And so through the staking of the hyper token, now economic security is dispensed through the network. What does it mean in practice? It means that now the validators, like the ones who were signing off on your transactions before, where the primary enforcement against them was basically like, hey, okay, well, there's these off-chain agreements, and if you violate them, it will have to pursue you through the, call it, off-chain legal system. Now those validators are basically, they have an economic stake on the line. And so in addition to them wanting to preserve their business, wanting to preserve their reputation, they'll also probably want to preserve this pool of money that they've been delegated. Now in the Hyperlane context, actually, one of the things that will be done over the next few months, I think is, pretty new and maybe somewhat innovative, is this notion of like assigning economic security. So you as a user, you as an app can say, hey, you know what? I really like that it's there. I'd feel even better if I knew that my share of this pool is larger than it would be otherwise. Can I pay for that privilege? In the same way that, like, hey, at some point I needed to get a life insurance policy. I have a couple of young kids. Yeah, I'm getting older. All right, maybe we up that. When it was just me, didn't really think of having one. Then you have the first kid, you're like, okay, we should get one. You have the second kid, you're like, oh, well, maybe I should increase it. And so it's kind of like your life circumstance changes, for different users and for different apps and even for different chains, their circumstance changes through their operations. You start off and you're two guys in a garage. It's just like, whatever, let's just get as many customers as we can. Suddenly that worked out really well. Now you have, tens of thousands of customers. The stakes are way higher. Well, maybe you want to up that policy. So through Hyperlane, right, like a mechanism is being worked on where now through the fees that are paid by different apps and users, that they can express a sort of preference for, I'd like to get more of that pool, please. And so that they basically put themselves first in the queue. If there ever was a security incident, that they're first in line for, basically receiving compensation from that pool of economic security. So economic security, first thing that it does. Second thing is, with Hyperlane, we took a different journey. I spent about 5 years as a venture investor before we founded Hyperlane. And one thing I saw that like never sat well with me was like, okay, we're all talking about how we're going to build this like decentralized future. But time after time after time, like, it's a decentralized future and a decentralized network. Oh, and those guys on Sand Hill Road or in Silicon Valley, they own 1/3 of it. They own 40% of it, sometimes more. And that wasn't really the case up until like 2018. 2018 was the emergence of more venture investment in this, in our industry. And so we were kind of hell bent on not doing it that way. There was this thinking of, you know what? Even if people are not complaining about it yet, how is this actually set us up for something that is truly open, innovative, and kind of like appends the order? And so did everything we could to raise the most minimal amount of money, to keep that ownership by investors as low as possible. And the end result is today, when you look at the hyper token, somewhere around call it about 11% is owned by investors. Where you compare that kind of industry standard, I'd say, especially in the interoperability category, is anywhere between 30 and 40%. Well, what do you get from making that type of sacrifice? We're kind of like playing on hard mode, from turning down, the venture money whenever the opportunity arose. You get a chance to turn the apps, chains, and end users that use Hyperlane into its owners. And you mentioned this what we call the expansion awards. You mentioned that. That's where the expansion awards come in. So basic concept is, hey, you use Hyperlane, you own Hyperlane. And every quarter, started with the TG event in late April. That represented like the culmination of about 5 quarters. But every quarter thereafter, words are going to be dispensed to the users and applications and chains that use Hyperlane on the basis of their pro rata usage. So you have an app, that app represents, call it 10% of Hyperlane activity in a quarter. Terrific. That app gets earmarked 10% of that expansion reward distribution. And now, as the app owner, it's your prerogative to say, hey, I know how to dispense the incentives to my users the best. And so I'm going to collect 100% of that pool, or 80%, whatever number I think is correct, and I'll figure out how to get it over to the users in the most effective way for me. Some apps are going to say, you know what? I don't want to think about it. Just give it all to the end users based on their traffic. And some apps that don't do anything, they'll end up with a default split that looks like 15% for the app, 85% for the users. And these are basically going to, be delivered as like a staked form of Hyperlane that can then, once received, then later be unstaked. So key idea is turn the people who make the thing valuable, right? The apps, the chains, the users, into the owners, which is surprisingly in crypto not a very, very common thing. I would say almost not common at all.
Yeah.
And within that, there's a few like small mechanics that just kind of try and really reward the, call it, most frequent, most recurrent users of Hyperlane, whether they're apps or chains. So we have this mechanism we call hyper streaks, where the idea is, hey, once you're staked, the longer your staked assets stay without moving, every single day that happens, you get, one more day on your streak. I'm a big fan of streaks myself. Every day now I have a long like Apple Fitness streak that I try to maintain. Now I'm like 600 something days into it.
Yeah, my son is very annoying with his Snapchat streaks, I can tell you that. He went to school camp and
right?
we had to keep them going for him.
Yeah, it's, streaks just feel like a more positive, like, hey, instead of, it's been common to say, you know what, lock your tokens up for a year and then you'll get enhanced rewards. Well, no, that's a tough thing to commit to. Just every day you decide, I want to keep the streak or I want to end the streak. Every day you keep the streak, you grow, and based on like the duration of them, 4 different levels of streak. The longest are at the highest level, lowest are basically at 0, and those get an enhanced share of the rewards. So, hey, you are gonna get, call it, 1,000 tokens this quarter based on your usage of Hyperlane. Hey, you have a really high hyper streak going. Terrific. You're gonna get an extra 60%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were
for
thinking
people that
about
want to
so good.
For people that want to play around with this, John, and get started immediately, like I guess the easiest way for people just to try Hyperlane out is go to the Hyperlane website and use the Bridge app, right? Which
go there or go on usenexus.org, which is going to have like a redesign pretty soon. That's a really good place to just see everywhere that's Hyperlane's connected, move some stuff around. Decent chance you have one or more assets that like runs on Hyperlane that you can interact with through there.
So, because if users want to experience Hyperlane tech, even though it's under the hood, is there an easy way for them to, is that how they would find that out?
Yeah, that's the best way. That's a place where like it surfaces, the majority of routes that Hyperlane basically services. Some cases where like the team says, hey, you know what, we really just want to have this on our own UI. Please don't add it to the general. No problem. But most other cases, teams really like being included both on their own and in the generalized one.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, John, as we finish up this part of the podcast, just again, we'll shout out the Hyperlane website and just tell people, how they can find it. And again, where they can find the bridging mechanism there on your website, all that good stuff. Shout out your socials, go for gold.
Of course. So hyperlane.xyz is kind of the main site with all the information. If you just want to play around with bridging, you don't want to read about anything, you don't care, just go on usenexus.org, start playing around with it. You play around with it enough, you're going to probably, be eligible for one of those quarterly expansion award distributions. If you're more developer oriented, I check out docs.hyperlane.xyz, which you can also reach easily through the main website. That's to learn everything you need to. On Twitter, sorry, I should say on X, it is at Hyperlane. Staying in touch with the feed, staying up to date is a really good way to just be informed of what's happening. And we also regularly, call it at least once a month, we'll do a community call where we try to run it almost like a live stream. We run through an agenda, but people love to be active through the chat and ask their questions. And so there's a bunch of people there who come on every time, and we have like a fun conversation, or at least hopefully for me, it's fun. Hopefully it's fun for the audience too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jon. It was a pleasure talking to us today. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us. All the best, and bye for now.
Thank you so much.